Okay, so today we're going deep into dark psychology.
Sounds a little ominous, right?
Yeah, a bit.
Yeah.
But it's based on some fascinating stuff you sent over.
Definitely some interesting material to unpack.
Yeah, we've got excerpts looking at the definition, the actual techniques involved.
Even the ethical side of things, which always gets a bit tricky.
Exactly. So our goal today is to really figure out what this dark psychology is all about.
Absolutely. And find those golden nuggets, those practical insights you can actually use.
Perfect. Now, the stuff you provided covers a lot of ground.
It does. We've got discussions on how it relates to regular psychology, which is a good starting point.
Right, because is it even a real branch of psychology?
That's one of the first things the material addresses.
Interesting. And then there's all this talk about personality types.
The so-called Dark Triad, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, narcissism.
Some heavy hitters.
Yeah, we'll have to break those down. And it goes beyond just personality.
Oh, yeah. The sources dive into how dark psychology utilizes existing psychological knowledge.
Things like behaviorism, Gestalt psychology, even psychoanalysis.
So it's tapping into all these different areas.
Exactly. And then there's stuff about color psychology, using your environment to your advantage.
Reverse psychology, which everyone's familiar with, but maybe not in this context.
Right. And the power of influencing large groups, that's a huge one.
And of course, we have to talk about the ethical considerations.
Absolutely, because knowing how to do something doesn't always mean you should.
For sure. And the sources also talk about how to spot manipulation.
Which is crucial in today's world. So much information flying around.
Right. Being able to protect yourself is key.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, let's aim to make this stuff practical.
Yeah, no need to get too academic.
Yeah.
We want takeaways, things people can actually use.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics. What is dark psychology, really?
Yeah, how does it differ from regular psychology?
Well, one of the first points the material makes is that it's not really a separate field of study.
Okay, so it's not like developmental psychology or clinical psychology.
Right. It's more about the application of psychological principles for specific aims.
Which are?
Persuasion and, let's be honest, sometimes manipulation. It's about influencing others.
Interesting. So you're taking this knowledge of how the mind works and using it strategically.
Exactly. And that's where the dark part comes in, I guess. The potential for misuse.
Right. Because any tool can be used for good or bad.
Absolutely. And understanding human behavior is a powerful tool.
Okay, so it's not a separate field, but a way of using psychology.
Right. A set of techniques, if you will.
Got it. And the sources then jump right into this dark triad.
Yeah, that's kind of the foundation for a lot of dark psychology.
Break it down for us. Machiavellianism, what does that even mean?
So it's based on the ideas of Niccolo Machiavelli, the guy who wrote The Prince.
Okay, I've heard of that. All about power and strategy, right?
Exactly. Machiavellianism is all about using strategy and calculated moves to achieve your goals.
So thinking several steps ahead.
Absolutely. And often appearing charming and helpful on the surface.
While maneuvering behind the scenes to get what you want.
Right. It's about playing the long game, not necessarily being openly manipulative.
Interesting. So less about brute force and more about subtle influence.
Exactly. Creating dependencies, shaping perceptions.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection to psychology here.
It's all about understanding how people react, how they make decisions.
Right. Now, what about psychopathy? That word has some pretty strong connotations.
Yeah, the sources are careful to point out that it's often misunderstood.
Not just about being a serial killer.
No, although that's certainly the extreme end of the spectrum.
So what's the core of psychopathy then?
Well, it involves a strong focus on one's own desires and a lack of remorse when those desires affect others.
Okay, so kind of a disregard for the impact on others.
Right. And the interesting thing is the material suggests that people with psychopathic traits...
Hold on, you're saying these aren't just bad guys in movies?
Not necessarily. They can be found in positions of power, actually.
Wow, that's a bit unsettling.
It is. The key difference between psychopathy and Machiavellianism is the primary driver.
Okay, so Machiavellianism is strategic, thinking long-term.
Right. Psychopathy is more about immediate self-interest, regardless of image.
So a Machiavellian might worry about reputation, while a psychopath wouldn't care as much.
Exactly. And the material even mentions that the combination of those two...
Hold on, combining Machiavellianism and psychopathy? That sounds terrifying.
It can be. That combination is sometimes referred to as sociopathy.
Right, that's another one we hear a lot. So we've got the strategic manipulator and the purely self-interested.
Right. And then we have the third member of the Dark Triad, narcissism.
Ah, yes, the selfie generation.
Well, it's more than just selfies, although that can be a manifestation.
So what is narcissism in this context?
At its core, it's excessive self-love, a need for admiration, and a real difficulty handling criticism.
We all know someone like that, right?
Probably. But here's the thing, the sources suggest that understanding dark psychology,
Wait, you're saying it could actually help with narcissism?
potentially, it might offer a path for more constructive development of those traits.
How so?
Well, by recognizing the attention-seeking and ego-driven aspects.
And maybe learning to manage them in a healthier way.
Exactly. It's not about condoning those behaviors, but understanding and channeling them.
Okay, so knowledge as a tool for self-improvement, even with these dark tendencies.
Precisely. It's about turning those insights inward.
Fascinating. Now, let's shift gears a bit. How does dark psychology actually use existing psychology?
Right. The sources talk about several areas. Behaviorism is one of the first.
I remember that from Psych 101. All about conditioning, right?
Exactly. The idea that you can shape behavior through rewards and punishments.
The classic example is Pavlov's dogs.
Right. But in dark psychology, it's about applying those principles in more subtle ways.
Give me an example.
Think about tipping a waiter. You're more likely to get good service if you tip well.
So you're positively reinforcing the behavior you want.
Exactly. Or using a rubber band on your wrist to quit smoking.
Every time you get a craving, you snap it, creating a negative association.
Right. And these principles can be used in more subtle ways, too.
Like giving small, unexpected gifts to build positive associations.
Exactly. It's about understanding how those basic principles of operant conditioning work.
So, shaping behavior through carefully applied rewards and consequences.
Right. And it can be surprisingly effective even in small doses.
Okay, that makes sense. What about Gestalt psychology? How does that fit in?
So Gestalt psychology focuses on how we perceive things as whole patterns.
Not just individual parts, but the overall picture.
Right. And the material suggests that understanding this can be crucial for framing situations.
So you're guiding someone towards a conclusion without them realizing it.
Exactly. Think about a magician. They're not just doing tricks, they're shaping your perception.
Creating an illusion by guiding your attention.
Precisely. And dark psychology can use those same principles to influence decisions.
Okay, so it's about shaping the context, the overall experience.
Right. And that can be very powerful, especially when done subtly.
Makes sense. And then there's psychoanalysis, the deep dive into the unconscious.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Psychoanalysis explores our hidden motivations.
All those impulses, desires, unresolved conflicts.
Exactly. And the sources talk about defense mechanisms like denial or projection.
Those unconscious ways we protect ourselves from uncomfortable feelings.
Right. And the material also mentions how repressed memories can influence us.
Leading to anxiety, depression, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Now, in the context of persuasion, understanding someone's unconscious drivers...
Wait, you're saying you can use someone's deepest fears and desires against them?
It's not quite that simple, but understanding those vulnerabilities can be used to influence.
That sounds incredibly powerful and ethically questionable.
Absolutely. It's one of those areas where knowledge can be used for good or bad.
Right, like a double-edged sword. The sources also mention psychodynamic processes for persuasion.
Yeah, and it circles back to those impulses, desires, motives, and unresolved conflicts.
How do those play into persuasion?
Well, with impulses, it's about being the trigger, tapping into immediate urges.
So making someone act without thinking.
In a way, yes. With desires, it's about focusing on the end goal.
Making them so focused on what they want that they overlook the how.
Right. Motives are about understanding the specific reasons behind someone's actions.
So you can tailor your approach to their individual justifications.
Exactly. And unresolved conflicts are those internal struggles we all have.
And someone using dark psychology could potentially exploit those weaknesses.
It's possible. It's about understanding what makes people tick, what makes them vulnerable.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's about tapping into those deep-seated motivations.
Exactly. And that's what makes dark psychology so fascinating and so potentially dangerous.
Right, a lot of responsibility comes with that knowledge.
Absolutely. Now let's switch gears again. One of the more surprising things in your materials.
You mean the part about color?
Yeah. You wouldn't think color has much to do with psychology.
But it turns out it's a big deal, right?
Huge. Our emotional associations with colors are deeply ingrained.
And marketers know this, obviously.
But yeah, they use it all the time.
Yeah.
And the sources break down specific colors and their meanings.
Like, red means danger.
Well, it can, but it's also associated with energy, passion, excitement.
I guess that's why they use it for sales signs.
Exactly. It creates a sense of urgency. And blue is often linked to trust and stability.
which is why so many banks use it in their logos.
Right. It conveys a sense of reliability, but the impact of each color can depend on context.
So you have to be aware of the subtle nuances,
Absolutely. And the sources talk about how you can consciously project certain colors.
like wearing a blue suit to a business meeting to project confidence.
Exactly. Or using green in your marketing materials to evoke a sense of health and nature.
Interesting. So it's not just about the colors themselves, but how they're used.
Right. It's all about understanding those subconscious associations and leveraging them.
Powerful stuff. Now, let's move on to another big one. Reverse psychology.
Yeah, everyone's familiar with that on some level, right?
Telling your kid, don't eat those cookies, knowing they'll do exactly that.
Exactly. But within the framework of dark psychology, it gets a bit more strategic.
So how does it work?
Well, the sources explain that it often works because of our natural desire for autonomy.
We don't like being told what to do.
Right. So when someone tells you not to do something, it can actually make you want to do it more.
That's so true. It's like a challenge.
Exactly. And the material notes that it can be particularly effective with certain personality types.
People who are naturally rebellious or independent.
Exactly. But there are downsides to using reverse psychology.
Like what?
Well, the person using it might end up wanting the denied outcome if the other person agrees too easily.
And it can backfire.
It can. And it can also create a power struggle in the relationship.
Okay, so it's not a foolproof tactic.
Definitely not. The sources give a bunch of examples of how reverse psychology can be applied.
Like in sports, right?
Yeah, the classic example is the coach who tells a talented player they're not good enough.
Hoping to motivate them by making them prove the coach wrong.
Exactly. And it can work with friends, too.
How so?
Like if you want to go to a certain event, you might express doubts about whether it's even possible.
So your friend will jump in and say, of course we can go.
Right. And you get what you wanted without even directly suggesting it.
Sneaky. The sources also talk about using it in the workplace, both with colleagues and bosses.
Yeah, there are lots of scenarios, like wanting your colleague to do a task you hate.
So you complain about how much you wish you could do it, knowing they'll offer to switch.
Exactly. Or with your boss, you might initially propose a more extreme idea.
Knowing they'll reject it, but then be more open to your original, more reasonable suggestion.
Right. It's all about playing the long game, using their reactions to your advantage.
Okay, starting to see the strategic thinking here. They also mention using it with kids and in relationships.
Yeah, with kids, it's often about making things more appealing by framing them as off limits.
Don't you dare clean your room.
Exactly. And in relationships, it can sometimes manifest as playing hard to get.
Trying to create a sense of mystery and intrigue.
Right. But the sources warn against using it in a manipulative way.
Because that can damage trust in the long run.
Absolutely. Open and honest communication is always the best foundation for any relationship.
Couldn't agree more. Now, the sources offer some specific phrases and tips for using reverse psychology.
Like what?
Well, they mention framing requests as prohibitions.
Don't even think about finishing all your vegetables.
Exactly. Or expressing doubt in someone's ability to do something you actually want them to do.
The classic, I bet you can't.
Right. And then there's the technique of creating limited options, where the less desirable choices.
Make the one you want stand out as the best option.
Clever. Okay, this is all very insightful, but a bit unsettling too.
It is. It's important to be aware of these tactics, both to use them and to recognize them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to another fascinating area. Leveraging your environment.
This is about understanding how your surroundings can influence your behavior and the behavior of others.
And how to use that to your advantage, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The sources differentiate between two types of environment.
Okay, break it down.
There's the immediate changing environment, they call it EC.
So the specific place you're in, the people around you at that moment.
Right. And then there's the more constant, perpetual environment, EP.
Which is more about your long-term surroundings.
Exactly. Your home, your workplace, your close relationships.
So the EC is more fleeting, while the EP is more stable.
Right. But both can be leveraged using dark psychology.
Give me some examples.
Well, with the EC, let's say you're stuck in an awkward conversation.
We've all been there.
You could try to subtly steer the conversation towards a topic the other person enjoys.
Shifting the focus to something more agreeable.
Exactly. And with the EP, it's about taking proactive steps to improve your surroundings.
Like if you're constantly around negative people, maybe it's time to set some boundaries.
Right. Or if your home environment is cluttered and chaotic, maybe it's time to declutter.
It's about taking control of your space and the people you surround yourself with.
Exactly. And the material also emphasizes the importance of your self-concept within your EP.
Okay, explain that one.
It's about recognizing that your self-worth comes from within.
Not just from external validation.
Right. And it's about being mindful of your internal dialogue, challenging negative self-talk.
So creating a more positive and supportive inner voice.
Exactly. And all of this ties into the concept of control, which the sources talk about quite a bit.
The desire to control your environment, your life.
Right. And they argue that cultivating a sense of competence is key.
Believing in your abilities, feeling capable.
Exactly. And while formal authority might seem like the ultimate form of control,
The boss, the leader, the person in charge.
the sources suggest that subtle influence built through trust and reliability can be even more powerful.
So being the trusted advisor, the person people turn to for guidance.
Exactly. And that often involves taking initiative, demonstrating competence.
Letting your actions speak for themselves rather than boasting about your skills.
Right. It's about earning respect and influence through your actions.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess a stable, positive EP can help with that.
Absolutely. Having a strong foundation makes it easier to navigate those changing environments.
Right. It's like having a secure base to operate from.
Exactly. Now, let's zoom out even further and talk about the power of the masses.
This is where it gets really big picture.
It does. The sources highlight how incredibly influential large groups of people can be.
Like mob mentality.
Kind of, but it's not always about negativity. It's just the power of collective belief.
Right. If enough people believe something, it almost becomes reality.
Exactly. And the material talks about how charisma and emotional connection are key to wielding that influence.
So it's not always about being factually correct.
Surprisingly, no. What matters more is how you make people feel.
It's about tapping into those shared emotions, creating a sense of unity.
Right. And the sources outline several strategies for achieving mass influence.
Like what?
Well, one is identifying a common cause or even a common enemy.
Something that unites people against a shared threat.
Exactly. Another is appealing to strong emotions, whether positive or negative.
So playing on existing fears or aspirations.
And humor is another powerful tool. It makes messages more relatable, more accessible.
Especially for people who might not grasp complex arguments.
Exactly. And finally, there's the strategy of creating a sense of shared identity within the group.
Making people feel like they belong, like they're part of something bigger.
Exactly. And all of these can be used to shape opinions and behaviors on a large scale.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
What are some of the potential consequences of this kind of influence?
Well, on the one hand, you might become a target for criticism from those who disagree with you.
That comes with the territory, I guess.
It does. But on the other hand, you have the power to shape trends and opinions.
Like becoming a thought leader, an influencer.
Exactly. And the key principle is that people tend to follow what they perceive as the majority view.
So if you can create that perception of widespread support,
You can really influence the direction things go.
that's a lot of responsibility. Now, given all of this, we have to talk about the ethics.
Yeah, the sources dedicate a whole section to the ethics of using dark psychology.
Because knowing how to do something doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. And the material emphasizes that dark psychology itself isn't inherently good or bad.
It's about the intention behind it, how it's used.
Right. It's like any tool. A hammer can be used to build a house or to hurt someone.
So what are the ethical considerations then?
Well, the sources explore the idea that right and wrong can be subjective.
Depending on context, culture, individual beliefs.
Exactly. But the key consideration is the potential for harm.
Whether it's physical, emotional, or even financial.
Right. If your actions are causing harm to others, that's a clear ethical red flag.
Makes sense. Yeah. Now, finally, how can we protect ourselves from being manipulated?
The first step is awareness. The more you understand these tactics, the better equipped you are to spot them.
So reading these sources is a good start.
It is. And being aware of the Dark Triad traits can be helpful.
So watch out for those manipulative Machiavellians, those callous psychopaths, those attention-hungry narcissists.
Right. And pay attention to those subtle attempts to condition your behavior.
Like excessive flattery or guilt trips.
Exactly. And be mindful of how information is being framed, how your perceptions are being guided.
It's about becoming a more critical thinker, questioning motivations.
Exactly. Knowledge is your best defense.
So wrapping it all up, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think the main takeaway is that dark psychology is all around us.
It's not just something out of a movie.
Right. It's a part of human nature, and understanding it can be both empowering and dangerous.
It's about wielding that knowledge responsibly.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the complexities of human behavior and using that knowledge ethically.
Well said. Today's deep dive into dark psychology has been eye-opening.
It certainly makes you think differently about everyday interactions.
It does. Now, for our listeners, think about the people you interact with on a daily basis.
Are there any subtle power dynamics at play that you might not have noticed before?
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time.